The cold winds of Kepler 442b howled across the crystalline surface as senior researcher Vextar adjusted his scanning equipment for the third time that morning. The dead planet held secrets beneath its frozen crust, and his team had been digging through layers of ice and stone for 6 months now. Dr. Cathara knelt beside a particularly interesting formation, her long fingers tracing patterns in the ancient rock that seemed almost too regular to be natural. "Vextar, you need to see this," she called out, her voice carrying easily in the thin atmosphere through their communication devices. The excitement in her tone made him abandon his current readings and float over to where she worked. The Zilithians moved with graceful, flowing motions that seemed to dance rather than walk, their translucent skin shimmering with colors that reflected their emotions. What Kithara had found defied their expectations. Buried deep in the ice was something that definitely did not belong to this world. The object was massive, easily the size of a small city, and made from materials that their scanners could barely identify. The surface was scarred and pitted, covered in what looked like battle damage from weapons that had left deep gouges in the strange metal hull. "Run a full-spectrum analysis," Vexitar ordered the rest of his team. "I want to know everything about this object before we proceed further." The other researchers quickly set up their equipment around the excavation site. Their tools hummed quietly as they worked, sending invisible beams deep into the buried structure. The results that came back made no sense at all. The object appeared to be a spacecraft of some kind, but its design was unlike anything in their vast databases of known civilizations. Where Zilithian ships were smooth and organic-looking, flowing like living creatures through space, this vessel was angular and brutal. Every line spoke of function over beauty, of a people who built things to survive rather than to inspire wonder. "The energy readings are impossible," announced Dr. Yathara, the team's technical specialist. "This thing has been buried here for thousands of years, maybe longer, but something inside is still active. The power source is completely unknown to our science." Cathara moved closer to the exposed section of hull, studying the strange markings that covered every available surface. Some appeared to be writing in an unknown language, while others looked like simple scratches or tally marks. Thousands upon thousands of small lines covered the metal, as if someone had been counting something for a very long time. "These marks," she said slowly, "they're not random. Look at how they're organized into groups. Someone was keeping track of something important enough to carve it into the very walls of their ship." Vextar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold planet around them. In all their studies of ancient civilizations, the Zilithians had learned that species who kept such careful counts of things were usually counting victories in war or the number of enemies they had killed. But that seemed impossible. War was an ancient concept, something that civilized species had abandoned thousands of years ago when they learned to live in peace and harmony. "Begin the extraction process," he ordered. "We need to get this object to the research station where we can study it properly." The team worked with careful precision, using their advanced technology to slowly free the buried ship from its icy prison. The process took several days, and with each layer of ice that melted away, more of the vessel's strange construction became visible. The ship was clearly built for war. Weapon ports dotted its hull like the eyes of some great predator, and armor. Plating had been welded over areas that showed the most damage. Whoever had built this vessel had expected to fight and had prepared accordingly. The very sight of it made the peaceful Zilithians uncomfortable, like finding a weapon in a children's playground. When they finally managed to extract the ship completely, they discovered it was even larger than they had first thought. The hull stretched for nearly 2 kilometers, and much of that length appeared to be devoted to weapon systems and armor. Only a small section in the center showed signs of being designed for crew habitation. "What kind of species builds a ship that's 90% weapons?" whispered Dr. Lethara, the youngest member of the expedition. "What were they so afraid of that they needed all this firepower?" "Perhaps they weren't afraid," Cathara replied thoughtfully. "Perhaps they were the thing that others feared, the Yao." Implications of that statement hung heavy in the air as they prepared to transport their discovery back to Research Station Nexus 7. The Zilithians had encountered the ruins of many extinct civilizations in their explorations, and most had followed. Predictable patterns, species that chose warfare over cooperation inevitably destroyed themselves, leaving behind only scattered ruins and cautionary tales. But this ship was different. Despite its obvious age and the battle damage covering its hull, the vessel appeared to be intact and functional. Whatever species had built it had known their craft well. Every weld, every armor plate, every weapon mount showed signs of careful planning and expert construction. As their transport ships carried the ancient vessel through space toward the research station, Vextar couldn't shake the feeling that they had found something dangerous. The ship radiated an aura of controlled violence that made his skin crawl. Even dormant and powerless, it seemed to be waiting for something. "Sir," called out the pilot of their lead transport, "we're receiving some unusual readings from the artifact. There are energy fluctuations coming from what appears to be the ship's core." "Is it dangerous?" Vexitar asked quickly. "Unknown, sir. The patterns don't match anything in our databases. It's almost like the ship is dreaming." The senior researcher stared out at the ancient vessel being towed behind them and wondered what dreams such a warship might have. In the distance, Research Station Nexus 7 grew larger against the starfield, its bright lights and welcoming design a stark contrast to the dark, scarred hull of their discovery. Soon they would begin their detailed examination of the ship and try to understand the species that had built it. Vextar hoped they would find answers that would help them catalog another extinct civilization. He had no way of knowing that they were about to wake up something that had been waiting a very long time to continue a war that was far from over. Research Station Nexus 7 had never hosted anything quite like the ancient warship now secured in its largest docking bay. The vessel looked completely out of place among the smooth, curved walls and soft lighting that the Zilithians preferred. Dr. Kethara walked slowly around the ship's exterior, taking detailed scans and photographs of every mark and symbol etched into its hull. "The construction methods are fascinating," she reported to Vextar, who was reviewing the initial analysis reports. "This species didn't just build their ships, they practically grew them through layer upon layer of repairs and modifications. Look at this section here where they've welded additional armor over what was obviously severe battle damage." The research team had been working for 3 days without finding a way inside the vessel. The ship's hull appeared to be sealed completely, with no obvious doors or access ports. Their scanning equipment could detect hollow spaces within the structure, but the strange metal seemed to block most of their attempts to see inside clearly. "Try the quantum resonance scanner," suggested Dr. Yathara. "If we can match the frequency of whatever power source is still active in there, we might be able to activate their systems." Kethara positioned the scanner against what appeared to be the ship's main hull and began adjusting the frequency settings. For several minutes nothing happened. Then suddenly the scanner began beeping rapidly. Energy readings spiked across all their monitoring equipment. Deep within the ship, lights began to flicker on. The vessel's hull vibrated slightly as ancient systems came back to life after centuries of dormancy. Then, without warning, a section of the hull simply disappeared, revealing a doorway that had been completely invisible moments before. "Incredible," whispered Vextar. "Their technology is far more advanced than we initially thought. That doorway was there all along, but somehow hidden from our scans." The interior of the ship was as harsh and functional as its exterior. Narrow corridors led deeper into the vessel, lit by strips of pale blue light that cast strange shadows on the metal walls. Everything was built to human proportions, though the Zilithians had no way of knowing that yet. The passages were too low for comfortable movement, and every surface showed signs of heavy use and constant maintenance. "The atmosphere inside is actually breathable for us," announced Dr. Lathara, who was monitoring their environmental readings. "Oxygen, nitrogen, and trace gases in ratios that are surprisingly close to what we prefer." As they moved deeper into the ship, they began to understand its layout. The outer sections were entirely devoted to weapons systems and defensive measures. Massive gun turrets lined the hull, their barrels still pointed outward as if ready to engage enemies that no longer existed. The amount of firepower concentrated in this single vessel was staggering. "These aren't just weapons," observed Yathara, studying one of the larger gun emplacements. "They're works of art. Look at the precision of the construction, the way every component has been designed for maximum efficiency." Whoever built these understood warfare at a level we can barely comprehend. The central section of the ship contained what appeared to be living quarters, though they were spartanly furnished and clearly designed for function rather than comfort. Small rooms lined the corridors, each containing basic sleeping arrangements and storage space. Everything was built to conserve space while still providing for the crew's basic needs. At the heart of the ship, they found the bridge. The command center was dominated by displays and control systems that were still partially functional. Chairs were arranged around a central command station, all facing forward toward a large viewing screen that currently showed only static. There, Kethara pointed to an alcove near the rear of the bridge. That looks like some kind of stasis pod. The cylindrical container was nearly 3 meters long and appeared to be made from the same unknown materials as the rest of the ship. Lights blinked steadily along its surface, and their scanners detected life signs from within. Something was still alive inside that pod, something that had been sleeping for a very long time. "Should we wake it up?" asked Lethara nervously. "We need to be careful," Vextar replied. "We have no idea what species built this ship or how they might react to finding aliens aboard their vessel." As they debated what to do, the decision was taken out of their hands. The ship's main computer system had been monitoring their presence since they first entered the vessel. Ancient protocols designed to protect the last survivor finally activated. The stasis pod began cycling through its wake-up sequence automatically. Jake Morrison had been dreaming of Earth when the revival process began. In his dreams, he was walking through the forests of his childhood, before the wars, before the fighting, when humanity still had a home world to call their own. The sensation of cold liquid draining from his lungs brought him back to harsh reality. The pod opened, with a hiss of escaping gases, and Morrison sat up slowly, his body protesting after so long in stasis. His vision cleared gradually, and he found himself looking at the strangest beings he had ever seen. 3 tall, graceful creatures with translucent skin and large eyes were staring at him with expressions of obvious fear and curiosity. "Well," he said in a voice rough from disuse, "you're definitely not human." The aliens stepped back quickly, their translator devices working frantically to decode his words. When they finally spoke, their voices were soft and musical, nothing like the harsh tones Morrison was used to hearing. "We mean you no harm," said the one who appeared to be their leader. "We found your ship buried on a dead world. We are researchers from the Zilithian Confederation, and we have brought your vessel to our station for study." Morrison looked around, the bridge of his ship, noting the centuries of dust that coated everything and the way some systems had failed during his long sleep. The war was over, that much was clear, but he had no idea who had won or what had happened to the rest of humanity. "How long was I out?" he asked. "According to our analysis, your ship has been buried for approximately 1,000 years, replied the alien scientist. "We are curious about your species. Our records contain no information about your people." 1,000 years. Morrison felt the weight of those words settle over him like a burial shroud. Everyone he had ever known was dead, including the rest of humanity if these aliens had never heard of his species. He was alone in a galaxy that had forgotten his people ever existed. "My name is Jake Morrison, commander of the UES Defiant, and you just woke up the last human being in the universe." The interrogation room on Research Station Nexus 7 had been designed for comfort and peaceful discussion, but Jake Morrison's presence seemed to change its very atmosphere. The human sat across from Dr. Kethara and her team, his posture relaxed, yet somehow ready for violence at any moment. Every movement he made was economical and purposeful, like a predator conserving energy while remaining alert for threats. "Tell us about your species," Kethara said gently, her translator converting her musical Zilithian speech into the harsh consonants of Morrison's language. "We want to understand what happened to your people." Morrison studied the aliens for a long moment before speaking. These beings radiated peace and innocence in a way that made him feel like a monster by comparison. Their very existence told him everything he needed to know about how the war had ended. "You want to know about humans," he said finally. "We were what you might call a warrior species, though that doesn't really capture what we became. We didn't start out that way. Earth was a beautiful world once, full of different peoples and cultures. But Earth was also a harsh teacher. He paused, remembering forests and oceans that no longer existed anywhere in the galaxy. Every step of human development was shaped by conflict. We fought each other for resources, for territory, for ideas. Most species would see that as a weakness, but it made us stronger. Every war taught us something new about survival. Dr. Yathara leaned forward, fascinated despite his discomfort with the subject matter. But surely your people must have eventually learned to live in peace, as all civilized species do. Morrison's laugh was bitter. Peace was a luxury we never had time for. When we finally reached the stars, we discovered we weren't alone. Most of the galaxy was controlled by something called the hegemony, an empire that had been expanding for millions of years. They gave every species the same choice: serve or die. The Zilithians exchanged worried glances. Their historical records mentioned the hegemony, but only as an ancient threat that had disappeared long before their civilization reached the stars. To them, it was mythology, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked expansion. Most species chose to serve, Morrison continued. Those that refused were wiped out completely. When the hegemony found Earth, they expected us to make the same choice as everyone else. And did you? Asked Cathara, though she suspected she already knew the answer. We told them to go to hell, Morrison replied. Humanity had never learned how to surrender. It wasn't in our nature. So we fought. Over the next several hours, Morrison told them the story of humanity's century-long war against the hegemony. He described battles where human ships, outnumbered 1,000 to 1, somehow managed to achieve victory through tactics and sheer refusal to give up. He showed them recordings from the Defiance computer systems, battles that the Zilithians could barely comprehend. "This is impossible," whispered Lethara, as she watched a recording of human fighters deliberately ramming themselves into hegemony dreadnoughts. No species would sacrifice themselves so willingly. "You don't understand," Morrison said patiently. "We weren't sacrificing ourselves. We were buying time. Every hegemony ship we destroyed was one less threat to the other species in the galaxy. Every day we kept them busy fighting us was another day for races like yours to escape and find places to hide." The ship's AI system activated, and a woman's voice filled the room. Lisa Carter had been Morrison's weapons officer, and her consciousness had been preserved in the ship's computer when her physical body was destroyed in their final battle. "Show them the Battle of Vega," she suggested. "That's when they'll understand what we were really fighting for." The room darkened as holographic displays showed the final major engagement of the human hegemony war. 50 human ships faced a hegemony fleet of over 2,000 vessels. The odds were so overwhelming that any rational species would have fled immediately. Instead, the humans attacked. "We knew we couldn't win," Morrison explained as they watched the battle unfold. "But we also knew that behind us were the evacuation, fleets of a dozen different species, all trying to reach the safety of the outer rim. We had to hold the line long enough for them to escape." The Zilithians watched in horrified fascination as human ships used tactics they had never imagined. Fighters loaded with explosives dove directly into enemy vessels. Damaged ships rammed themselves into hegemony command centers. When their weapons ran out of ammunition, the humans used their ships themselves as weapons. "Every one of those marks on my ship's hull represents a hegemony vessel destroyed," Morrison said quietly. "We kept count because it mattered. Every enemy ship we eliminated was one less threat to the innocent species trying to find safety." The Battle of Vega ended with the complete destruction of the human fleet, but not before they had taken nearly half the hegemony forces with them. More importantly, they had bought the time needed for the evacuation fleets to reach safety. After Vega, there were only a few hundred human ships left in the entire galaxy, Morrison continued. "We scattered, trying to draw the hegemony away from the refugee populations. The Defiant was part of the last group, fighting a running battle across 3 star systems." He gestured to the scars on his ship's hull. "We held them off for 6 months before they finally cornered us. That's when I went into stasis, hoping that someday our sacrifice would be remembered." Kethera was quiet for a long time, processing everything she had learned. Finally, she spoke. Your species chose to become extinct so that others could live. We chose to become what we needed to be, Morrison corrected. The galaxy needed protectors, so we became protectors. It needed warriors, so we became warriors. And when it needed martyrs, we became martyrs. Lisa's voice spoke from the ship's speakers again. Tell them about the memorial, Jake. Morrison nodded sadly. Before the final battle, the human government created what we called the Memorial Protocol. Every ship, every station, every human outpost in the galaxy was programmed to record our story and preserve it for future generations. We wanted the galaxy to remember that freedom isn't free, and that sometimes monsters are necessary to fight monsters. The aliens sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what they had learned. Their peaceful galaxy, their advanced civilizations, their freedom to explore and discover, all of it had been purchased with human blood. The hegemony, Vextar asked finally. What happened to them after your people were gone? Morrison's expression darkened. That's what worries me. The hegemony wasn't destroyed, just delayed. They were an empire built on conquest and expansion. Losing to humanity would have set them back, forced them to rebuild and regroup, but they wouldn't have given up. He looked directly at each of the Zilithians in turn. Tell me, in all your 1,000 years of peace and exploration, have you ever wondered what happened to all the warrior species? Where are the fighters and the soldiers who should exist in any natural galaxy? The implications of his questions hung heavy in the air. The Zilithians had indeed wondered about that. Their galaxy seemed unusually peaceful, populated entirely by species that preferred cooperation to conflict. They had assumed it was simply the natural evolution of intelligent life. We were the immune system, Morrison said quietly. Humanity was the galaxy's immune system, and now we're gone. If the hegemony ever returns, there's no one left who knows how to fight them. The warning came at 0347 hours Galactic Standard Time, when the Deep Space Monitoring Station at the edge of the Andromeda Arm went silent. Fleet Admiral Zixandra of the Galactic Council was awakened by her aide, who handed her a data pad with trembling hands. Admiral, we've lost contact with Monitoring Station Epsilon 7, the young officer reported. Their last transmission was a priority alert about massive energy signatures approaching from beyond the galactic rim. Zixandra studied the data with growing concern. Epsilon 7 was one of their most advanced monitoring posts, equipped with sensors that could detect spacecraft across several light years. For it to go completely silent suggested something catastrophic had occurred. Have we heard anything from the nearby systems? She asked. That's what's worrying us, Admiral. The Centauri colonies, the research stations in the Beta Quadrant, even the civilian shipping lanes, everything in that sector has gone completely quiet. Within hours, the scope of the crisis became clear. An entire section of the galaxy's outer rim was going dark, system by system, as something advanced inward with terrifying efficiency. The few ships that managed to escape the advancing darkness brought tales that chilled the peaceful species of the galactic core. Captain Rayanna of the merchant vessel Starweaver was one of the lucky survivors. She arrived at Nexus Station with her ship's hull scarred by weapons fire and her crew in a state of shock. Her report to the Galactic Council painted a picture of absolute horror. They came without warning, she testified, her normally melodious voice reduced to a frightened whisper. Ships the size of moons, covered in weapons that could crack planets. They didn't try to communicate or negotiate. They just started destroying everything in their path. The description matched ancient records that most council members had dismissed as mythology. The hegemony, the great destroyers that their ancestors had whispered about in cautionary tales, had returned to reclaim their empire. At Research Station Nexus 7, Jake Morrison watched the incoming reports with grim recognition. He stood in the station's command center, studying tactical displays that showed the enemy's advance patterns with the eye of someone who had fought this war before. It's definitely the hegemony, he told Vextar and the assembled Zilithian researchers. I recognize their operational doctrine. They advance in waves, overwhelming each system before moving to the next. They're not interested in conquest right now. They're clearing obstacles. Dr. Kethara looked at the strategic maps with growing despair. How long do we have before they reach the core systems? Morrison performed quick calculations in his head. At their current rate of advance, maybe 6 months, less if they decide to accelerate their timetable. The Galactic Council's response was swift, but ultimately futile. Every peacekeeping fleet in the galaxy was mobilized and sent to establish defensive lines around critical systems. The Zilithians, the Altarians, the Vegan Confederation, all the great peaceful civilizations of the galaxy prepared for war with weapons designed for ceremonial purposes and tactics learned from history books. Admiral Zixandra led the first major engagement herself, commanding a fleet of 300 ships equipped with the most advanced technology the peaceful galaxy could produce. They met the hegemony advance force in the Rigel system, confident that their superior numbers and advanced sensors would carry the day. The battle lasted exactly 14 minutes. Morrison watched the tactical recordings with Lisa Carter, whose AI consciousness provided commentary that the Zilithians found disturbing in its clinical detachment. "Look at how they cluster their ships," Lisa observed. "No proper screening formations, no overlapping fields of fire. They're fighting like this is a parade, not a battle." "They've never had to fight for their lives," Morrison replied. "For 1,000 years, they've lived in a galaxy where conflict was something that happened to other people in history books. They don't understand that war is about killing your enemies before they can kill you." The Galactic Council's fleets were systematically destroyed over the following weeks. Ship after ship fell to hegemony weapons that had been designed specifically to crush any resistance. The peaceful species of the galaxy discovered that their technology, optimized for exploration and cooperation, was woefully inadequate for actual combat. Worse than the military defeats was the psychological impact. Species that had known only peace for millennia found themselves facing an enemy that viewed them as nothing more than obstacles to be removed or resources to be harvested. The very concept of an enemy that could not be reasoned with or negotiated with was alien to their way of thinking. "We need your help," Vextar finally admitted to Morrison. "Our fleets are being destroyed. Our worlds are falling one by one. You're the only one left who knows how to fight these monsters." Morrison studied the tactical situation with professional detachment. The hegemony was advancing on multiple fronts, using the same strategies they had employed against humanity centuries earlier. The difference was that this time they faced no real resistance. "Your people are brave," he told the assembled council representatives, "but bravery isn't enough. You're fighting with the wrong tools, the wrong tactics, and the wrong mindset. You think war is about proving who's right. War is about proving who's left alive at the end." Admiral Zixandra, her once proud fleet reduced to a handful of battered ships, listened to Morrison's assessment with growing desperation. "Then teach us," she pleaded. "Show us how to fight." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, considering the magnitude of what they were asking. To teach these peaceful beings the art of war would be to strip away their innocence forever. They would have to learn to think like killers, to embrace the brutal mathematics of survival. "If I teach you what you need to know," he said finally, "you won't be the same species afterward. War changes everyone it touches. Are you prepared for that?" "We're prepared to do whatever is necessary to survive," Zixandra replied. "No," Morrison corrected. "You're prepared to do whatever is necessary to win. Survival isn't enough against the hegemony. They'll just keep coming until you're all dead or enslaved. The only way to stop them is to make them afraid to continue." Over. The following days, Morrison began the impossible task of turning peaceful explorers into warriors. He taught them that space combat wasn't about elegant maneuvers or technological superiority, but about putting weapons on target while preventing the enemy from doing the same to you. "Forget everything you know about fair fighting," he instructed a group of young officers. "The hegemony doesn't fight fair, and neither can you if you want to win. Use every advantage you have, exploit every weakness you can find, and never, ever give them a chance to recover." Dr. Kethara watched these training sessions with a mixture of fascination and horror. She was seeing her people transformed from peaceful scientists into something harder and more dangerous. The change was necessary, but it came at a cost she was only beginning to understand. "Is this what happened to humanity?" she asked Morrison during a break in the training. "Did the war turn your entire species into killers?" "No," Morrison replied. "War revealed what we already were. Every species has the capacity for violence, yours included. The difference is that humans learned to embrace that capacity when we needed to. Your people are learning the same lesson now." As reports continued to arrive of hegemony victories across the Outer Rim, Morrison realized that training alone wouldn't be enough. The peaceful species of the galaxy needed more than just military knowledge. They needed something to give them hope. They needed a victory to prove that the hegemony could be beaten. "We need to make a stand," he announced to the assembled council. "One battle where we show them that this galaxy won't roll over and die. One victory to rally the other species and prove that the hegemony can be defeated." "Where?" asked Zixandra. Morrison studied the tactical displays one more time, looking for the perfect battleground. Finally, he pointed to a system that held special significance for him. "Sul," he said. "We make our stand in the ruins of humanity's home system. It's time to show the galaxy what humans died for." The Sol system was a graveyard. Dead worlds orbited a dying star, their surfaces scarred by weapons that had been fired in anger 1,000 years earlier. The asteroid belt that had once been a thriving industrial center now drifted as silent chunks of metal and stone, all that remained of humanity's greatest achievements. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the rebuilt Defiant, watching as the combined fleet of the galaxy's remaining free species took position among the ruins of his home system. Zilithian vessels floated alongside Altarian cruisers and vegan destroyers, all of them preparing for what everyone knew would be the final battle. "The fleet is in position, Commander Morrison," reported Captain Ryan Murphy, a young Zilithian officer who had shown an aptitude for the brutal mathematics of warfare. Morrison had been training him personally, trying to compress centuries of human military experience into the few weeks they had before the hegemony arrived. "Good," Morrison replied. "Remember what we practiced. The hegemony expects us to fight, like civilized beings. They expect formations and honor and rules of engagement. We're going to give them something different." Dr. Kethara monitored the communications channels from her position at the science station. She had volunteered to serve aboard the Defiant despite having no military training, driven by a need to understand what her people were becoming. The transformation of the galaxy's peaceful species into warriors had been swift and brutal, stripping away millennia of cultural evolution in a matter of weeks. "Long-range sensors are detecting the hegemony advance force," she reported. "They're coming in exactly as you predicted, Jake. 3 battle groups in a standard conquest formation." Morrison nodded grimly. The hegemony had grown arrogant during their centuries of expansion, secure in the knowledge that no species had ever successfully resisted them for long. They were about to learn that assumptions could be deadly in warfare. "All ships, this is Morrison," he broadcast to the fleet. "You've trained hard for this moment. Remember that you're not just fighting for your own species today. You're fighting for every peaceful civilization in the galaxy, for the right to exist without fear, for the future of everyone who refuses to bow down to tyrants." The hegemony fleet emerged from hyperspace with typical arrogance, their massive dreadnoughts advancing in perfect formation toward the waiting defenders. Admiral Krathak, the hegemony commander, had conquered dozens of systems and expected this battle to follow the same pattern as all the others. Resistance would be brief, surrender would be swift, and another sector would fall under hegemony control. He was surprised to find the defending fleet scattered throughout the system, rather than concentrated in a defensive formation. The tactical display showed enemy ships hiding among asteroids, lurking near the gas giants' moons and using the radiation from the dying sun to mask their signatures. "Curious," he mused to his second-in-command. "These primitives appear to be attempting some form of guerrilla tactics. No matter. Order all battle groups to advance. We'll sweep them from space in one coordinated strike." Morrison watched the hegemony ships begin their advance and smiled coldly. "All units execute Plan Alpha. Remember, we don't fight fair." The battle began not with a grand charge or a thunderous exchange of fire, but with a series of seemingly random explosions throughout the hegemony fleet. Ships that had been advancing confidently suddenly found themselves surrounded by debris fields that erupted without warning. "What are those detonations?" demanded Admiral Krathak. "Unknown, sir. Our sensors show no enemy weapons fire. It's almost as if the debris itself is exploding." Morrison had spent days seeding the system with improvised mines, using wrecked human ships and asteroids as camouflage. Each mine was little more than a reactor core with a proximity sensor, crude but devastatingly effective against ships that weren't expecting them. "Phase 2, Morrison ordered. "All fighters, begin your attack runs." The hegemony fleet suddenly found itself under assault from hundreds of small craft that seemed to appear from nowhere. Zilithian fighters dove out of gas giant atmospheres, Altarian bombers emerged from behind moons, and Vagan interceptors rose from the surfaces of dead planets where they had been hiding. "These aren't standard fighter tactics," observed Krethak's tactical officer. "They're not trying to engage our defensive screens. They're ramming our ships directly." Morrison had taught the alien pilots the most difficult lesson of all, that sometimes survival required sacrifice. Each fighter that crashed into a hegemony vessel was crewed by volunteers who understood that their deaths might save billions of innocent lives. Lisa Carter's voice echoed through the Defiance bridge as she coordinated the attack. "Target their command and control systems. Don't waste ammunition on their armor. Hit them where it hurts." The battle raged for hours, with neither side able to claim a decisive advantage. The hegemony fleet was larger and more heavily armed, but the defenders fought with a desperation and cunning that their enemies had never encountered before. Every asteroid became a potential ambush point, every piece of debris a possible weapon. "Sir," reported the hegemony communications officer, "we're receiving a transmission from the enemy fleet. It's coming from that ancient vessel at the center of their formation." "Put it through," Krethak ordered. Morrison's face appeared on the main screen, scarred and weary but unbroken. Behind him, the bridge of the Defiant showed clear signs of battle damage, but his crew continued to work with grim efficiency. "Admiral Krathak," Morrison said calmly. "I know who you are. I've studied your tactics, your history, your methods. 1,000 years ago, you killed my species because we refused to bow down to your empire. And yet here you are," Krathak replied, "the last of a dead race leading primitives in a hopeless battle. Surrender now, and I might allow some of your allies to survive as slaves." Morrison's smile was cold as winter death. "You still don't understand what you're facing. This isn't about winning or losing anymore. This is about making sure that when you leave here, you'll think twice before you ever threaten another peaceful world." The Defiant began moving toward the center of the hegemony formation, her ancient weapon systems charging for what everyone knew would be her final attack. The ship's hull glowed with barely contained energy as Morrison prepared to activate the weapon that humanity had built for exactly this moment. "All ships," Morrison broadcast to the Allied fleet. "Pull back to minimum safe distance. Lisa, initiate the memorial protocol." Deep in the Defiant's core, systems that had been dormant for 1,000 years came online. The ship's power plant began overloading in a carefully controlled chain reaction that would tear a hole in space itself. "You're going to destroy yourselves," Krathak said, finally understanding what was happening. "We're going to destroy you," Morrison corrected, "and we're going to make sure the galaxy remembers what happens to species that prey on the innocent." The explosion that followed was visible from 3 star systems away. The Defiant's destruction created a gravity well that pulled in half the hegemony fleet and shattered the rest beyond any hope of repair. When the light faded, the Sol system was empty except for scattered debris and the surviving ships of the Alliance fleet. Captain Murphy stood at the communications console, tears streaming down his face as he tried to raise the Defiant on any frequency. But Morrison and his crew were gone, vaporized in the same instant that they had struck the decisive blow against humanity's ancient enemies. "Sir," whispered Dr. Cathara, "we're receiving a transmission. It's coming from everywhere at once." Lisa Carter's voice filled the bridge, transmitted from the network of memorial protocols that Morrison had activated throughout the galaxy. "This is Lieutenant Lisa Carter of the United Earthship Defiant. If you're hearing this message, it means that humanity's final battle has been fought. We died as we lived, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The message continued, carrying the full history of humanity's war against the hegemony to every corner of the galaxy. It told the story of a species that had chosen to become warriors so that others could remain peaceful, that had sacrificed everything so that freedom could survive. In the months that followed, the surviving hegemony forces retreated beyond the Galactic Rim, their expansion finally halted by an enemy they couldn't comprehend or defeat. The peaceful species of the galaxy had learned the harsh lesson that freedom requires eternal vigilance, and they established the human memorial fleet to ensure that warriors would always stand ready to defend the innocent. Captain Murphy, now Admiral Murphy, stood before the monument that had been erected in the ruins of the Sol system. The simple stone marker bore no grand inscription, only the words that Jake Morrison had spoken in his final moments. We became what the galaxy needed us to be. Around him, young officers from dozens of species studied the tactics and strategies that humanity had developed over centuries of warfare. They learned not just how to fight, but when to fight, and most importantly, what was worth fighting for. The galaxy was at peace again, but it was a peace protected by those who understood that evil could only triumph when good beings refused to fight. Humanity was extinct, but their legacy lived on in every species that chose to stand against tyranny rather than submit to it. In the end, that was the greatest victory of all.